My name is Scott Rennick. I'm the owner publisher of Climbing Business Journal, and you guys know what we do. And we work hard to uplift all the professions in the climbing gyms, but especially route setting. We love route setting. Our founder was level 5 route setter, Mountain Health. Back in the day, I was a commercial route setter in late 90s and early 2000s. Route setting runs pretty deep in our blood, so it's really privileged to be able to work with Vortex and Justin and Foxman on these, and we take pride in putting this together for you. So, and yeah, I'd just like to turn it over to Foxman and Justin with Vortex Routesetting. They've been doing that gig for some years now, and both of them bring over a decade of experience. They've been leaders in route setting. Not only they volunteer in the CWA communities, both work at height and the professional route setting. Both of them have led crews that had multiple facilities, so they understand that kind of multi-site responsibility and route setting leadership. And it's just a privilege to work with them. So I'm going to hand it over to you. Thanks for being here, and I'll go on mute.
Thanks for having us, Scott.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. So we've also got Tyler Nelson in the room. Many already might have known or might know him, owner and creator of Camp for Human Performance. He's done a lot of work, both writing, managing climbing injuries for athletes around the globe. He's based out of Salt Lake. He's super talented. You know, we felt like this is the best topic for him to come on, and I'm happy that you could join us today, Tyler.
Yeah, honored to be here. Thanks for the offer.
Yeah, so this is a subject that we'll probably hit pretty regularly. I think this is something that all route setters are trying to figure out is how to get strong, stay strong, avoid injuries while we are doing our jobs. So any of you who've been here before know that I usually start off with a bit of a spiel. This is one of the subjects that we can start to get fairly negative about if we let ourselves, but we are going to stay focused on solutions as best we can. We all know the problems, so we don't need to spend a bunch of time explaining why it is so challenging to train and avoid injury while also route setting at a good clip. So I'm just going to name them right off the bat. And if you want to like have a beer about it when I'm next in your town, I will gladly do that. But we're not going to like portal into the pit of despair. Now we're going to talk about, some ways to make things as better as we can. So things that we already know, climbing is full of risk already. And route setting is a very physical job with both repetitive and non-repetitive tasks. Not a whole lot of rest. There's a lot of repetitive lifting, awkward movements. It's very grip intensive. And yeah, there's just not much time for recovery and training. So we know this. So now we're going to look at some of the questions that we're going to try to answer today.
Yeah, so we highlight the problems, but like, what are we trying to address here? The biggest question, I think, is what can route setters do to stay healthy? We've done other webinars on sustainability. We'll touch a little bit about that, but today the focus is like, how do we both progress as a climber while having to manage this like daily workload? And is there an ideal workout or a schedule to follow to keep us healthy while we're having to set some number of times per week? And so I think, that's sort of what we're thinking about. I joked with Fox and Tyler yesterday that like just do 1,000 push-ups a day. That doesn't seem to be working, and not at least for me. So I'm kind of curious. Maybe we kick it to the room and see where people are at. How many days a week are we setting? Like, are we all route setters? Like, who's here?
Yeah, so I think starting off with just like, either we can raise hands or like hop in to say how many days a week people are setting, because that has a huge impact on how much recovery time and time for personal climbing and training we have.
Yeah, maybe even just dropping a number in chat might be the fastest and easiest.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I'm seeing 3 days, 3 to 4 days, 2 days a week. One of the things that we've seen as Vortex is, okay, we've got 3 days. We do a lot of industry data. We've got a big survey that we've had going for multiple years, 2 to 4 days a week. Seems like the average for most route setters is still 3 to 4 days a week. About 3 years ago, I was averaging pretty heavily towards 4, and it does seem to be shifting down slightly. All right, 2 to 4 days, 2 days, 3 to 4 days. All right, so right in that middle range. We don't have anybody setting 5 days a week currently. At least not in this chat. All right, 1 day a week. Cool. And then just if you wanted to raise your hands, I don't know if you all know how to do that. There's a little hand raising icon. For who right now is taking time to do any strength training? Well, yeah, so a few people. And then how many people are taking active rest, or sorry, I say active rest days, and that means a different thing. How many people are taking rest days where you are not climbing? Yeah, Josh knows. Cool. Okay, yeah, so a good number of people. Very cool. Awesome. Yeah, that just gives us a better sense of like who is in the audience today and who's here. Cool. All right, so I think probably one of the best things we can do right now, Tyler, is just like kick this to you. So if route setters are looking to get stronger and avoid injury, what should they be doing?
So there's always a level of individuality with it in terms of the current strength level of the athlete, how long they've been climbing, their experience level, setting. Obviously, efficiency with setting is a thing that probably gets underappreciated, where people that have been doing it a long time are very efficient with how often they put the holds up and how they have to adjust them, where a new setter is going to take a little bit more time, a little bit more clunky, let's say, or a little bit more fatigue. So it always has to have some level of individuality to it. But ultimately, route setters, in my mind, are like the cornerstone of a climbing gym because they make the climbing gym fun. So their ability to like stay healthy is a top priority for the health and success of a gym. So they need to find some time in their training week to overload their tissues at a much heavier intensity than route setting requires. And even though route setting feels very hard and it is physically hard, but it's really because of the repetitive nature of it. And so we know from lots of other sports and data that loading tissues that we primarily use for climbing, and we can talk about what those are, just needs to be done at a progressively heavier intensity a couple days a week. And really that's as basic as it needs to be. But the other component of that is it needs to be progressive, but they need to focus on their nutritional status and overall intake and their sleeping hygiene, making sure they're getting plenty of rest between sessions. And I think that's probably underappreciated with most route setters because they're young and healthy and want to do all the things.
I think, you're talking about the efficiency and also being young and healthy. I was thinking when I first started route setting, I was setting 5 days a week. And I was telling myself, I'm like, it is fine. I feel great. I've acclimated to this workload. And I've talked to a number of my peers at the time, and we're like, oh yeah, we can do this for like a while. Cause like we're pretty efficient. I've learned an efficient way to do this. And like my body's used to it. And as I started decreasing the amount that I was setting, I didn't necessarily notice a huge change until I just stopped setting full time. And like by full time, I mean, I'm still usually doing 4 days a week. And so how do you approach younger setters who haven't hit that feeling of like my body hurts and I need to do something before they get to that point? Because yeah, I would have just told you, 10 years ago, I'm like, I'm great. I don't need to do anything. How do you approach them?
Yeah, it's definitely hard. I mean, and most of my clients that I talk to that are route setters have injuries because I largely do rehabilitation, which is not a surprise that that's pretty common in the route setting community. But I think one of the easiest ways to think about a route setter's training schedule is their forerunning is a big part of their climbing practice. And I think they maybe forget that. I think route setters undervalue how good they are at practicing climbing because they do so much of it. but they don't feel like they're getting their climbing practice in because they're working. And obviously it's not always as intense, but just appreciating that you're getting a lot of technical practice in by your job should satisfy a lot of athletes' need to do more stuff. And so they can cut off 30-40% of their own climbing training just because their job requires them to do it. Right. And so I think like maybe convincing young setters that do have a lot of capacity and time and enthusiasm, like having them understand that practice is their climbing training, I think is maybe one easy place to start. But that's not an easy topic to handle by any means.
Yeah, no, I mean, that makes sense based on like my own experience with it. And then I ended up working with a coach for a number of years. Like even once I was old and tired and injured, because like you don't need to be climbing as much. And I'd always just been told like the best thing you can do for your climbing is climb more. And I wasn't, most of my forerunning was not necessarily at my capacity. And so learning that just like that constant use of my body, even at that lower intensity level, was still wearing on my joints and not like letting me actually train.
Right. Technically, the bouldering pyramid of a route setter is quite large in the lower ranges. And obviously they're setting hard routes as well, but maybe they can't climb the hardest routes and the gym doesn't need as many hard routes. And so their technical skills at lower grades is quite high. So in addition to like counting that as your climbing training, I always tell setters that are injured to minimize how many attempts they give a boulder and try and get very familiar with and competent with, kind of visually analyzing the route, knowing that will climb well, so they don't have to do all those extra attempts, knowing that this climbs well, right? Which is another factor. So it's like really shaving off any unnecessary climbing volume stress for the route setter. It has to be a mandatory kind of component of not getting injured as a route setter.
I like to think about this. So I've been setting for nearly 20 years. And, when I was in the baby route setting mode, I was setting 5 days a week, and I don't wish that on anyone. But I have this vision in my brain where it's made it seem easier to do 4 days a week or 3 days a week, right? Because I'm like comparing it to what was. And now I'm also older. And so all of these things are conflating. I'm in a position now where I have a team of route setters across multiple locations, and I'm sort of tasked with putting together programs for when do they set, how long do they set, how much do they set. And I can't control what they do on the weekends. I can't control what they do after they clock out, but I can put together a program that is like hopefully going to support some level of sustainability and injury prevention. And on the similar side, I'm like the person who gets all the L&I requests when they pop a pulley or they like do something else at work. And so there's definitely, I feel like gyms and or managers, whether it be the route setter, the head route setter, the director, whatever roles you or your teams might be playing, there's like a lot of investment in these route setters and trying to figure out how to keep them healthy. Like there's two sides. There's what are they doing and how can you like encourage or educate them to like make good decisions. And then there's also like if they're being paid during their workday, what can we, and so I think there's a lot of give and take there. And so there's maybe a lot to unpack in that, but we can kind of look at it from both perspectives, but that's kind of how I see it.
Yeah. So I guess like looking at that component of what route setters can do and what managers can facilitate, Justin and I were able to go listen to you speak at the CWA Summit, and you talked about how route setters can build some of this injury prevention and training into their days. And so for the people in this room who weren't there, can you emphasize some of that for us so that if there are managers here who are looking for like how can I support individuals, or if there's like individuals who are like I don't know what to do, how can I help, how would you suggest that people structure their days?
Yeah, I think for, let's say, someone on average that's climbing 3 days a week, which seems like in the room, like there's going to be some sort of stripping, cleaning in the morning, and then some sort of setting. And then typically in the afternoon, there's forerunning. And so sometime in that day, it makes the most sense because of like the constraint schedule, that athletes should and could have a very short compound movement, like whole body strength training routine that they do as their warm up for setting. And that seems very counterintuitive to most people, that the high intensity loading is going to make them really tired. And at the beginning, if they're not familiar with lifting weights, it might happen. But once they get used to that, that's the kind of stimulus that I'm talking about, that the muscles and the tendons need to maintain a high capacity for repetitive tasks. And so it can be just like one pushing thing, one pulling thing, one whole body thing, and something for the hand and the fingers and the forearms. And in my mind, for most of my clients that get injured, that's typically what I prescribe, is have them find that time, 45 minutes, 60 minutes at max, where they can satisfy that physiologic need and they can go do their forerunning or setting afterwards. And that's like, for most athletes, that's very health promoting for the tissue, but it's a very different stress than route setting is.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. We had a good question in the chat from Tara asking about tracking forerunning volume as part of the training journal. And so, I can speak to what I've done and what my team has done in the past, where we did start tracking volume by putting just a piece of tape next to a boulder. And so this was a little bit individually and a little bit for the entire team, where we would not run a boulder more than 3 times before, got a little bit mixed up in my words. We would only run a boulder 3 times without making changes. And ideally, a boulder didn't get run more than 5 times start to finish. And then we would also track for ourselves how many times we were doing individual boulders. It is a little bit extra, like it was definitely hard to keep track of at a certain point. But it did highlight to us, if we did it like once every couple of weeks, we could see that we were, starting to trend in different directions, of like getting psyched and trying a boulder, or like, oh, this boulder is easy, so I'll just like do it a whole bunch of times. And so seeing that those tick marks were adding up much faster than we expected was informative for us. Does anybody else track forerunning in some kind of capacity?
I love that idea. I don't track forerunning in capacity, but I'm thinking more on the sports science side, where in soccer, they will attach an accelerometer to someone's body and they can track the distance they run and the acceleration and the slowing down. And they can easily get a sense of what fatigue looks like, and maybe in the future. And this is done in climbing as well, with, accelerometers strapped to people's hands, that they can actually assess how many hand moves they're doing, how fast they're moving. Like those kinds of things in the future will be very cutting edge methods to understand fatigue. But I don't do that, with the route setters, of course, but that's something that's on the table in the future.
Yeah. We've got another question in the chat that's really interesting, asking if there's any data published, informal or anecdotal, on incidents of injury amongst route setters and how it differs, if at all, from climbers at large.
I don't think I've ever read any published literature. I certainly have a lot on climbing in general, but there's no doubt that I think the last statistic is like 93% of rock climbing injuries are overuse injuries. And route setters are rock climbers with a physical job. And so there's no doubt that their incidence of injury is higher because of that. But the repetitive nature of climbing is the risk factor in most climbers. And so if we add on to that extra repetitive tasks, then certainly that's going to be higher than the regular population that sit at a desk all day like me.
I'd be very interested in knowing that data, and I would be curious how easy it would be to ascertain, because I think it typically it's depending on the severity of the incident. A lot of organizations are less willing or comfortable sharing that stuff for various reasons.
We could potentially run a survey on that, though, as Vortex. Like, it would be more informal than some gosh, words are so hard. Some types of surveys that we've run, but it would be really interesting to see. I think one of the things you mentioned, Tyler, about the overuse injuries, I've only, for the most part, had like wild acute injuries, and I've always chalked it up to just bad luck or being clumsy, until somebody pointed out that I was just always tired. Like, the injuries always happened at the end of a session. And so I like to like throw that in there for other people to think about because I had never thought about it just for years and years. But my movement patterns changed and my falling patterns changed. I was moving strangely, and so I wasn't compensating. And all of a sudden, I've got another broken leg. Womp womp.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, just being aware of like overall fatigue, I think, is something that we can all be more cognizant of. I don't know about other people in this room, but I love to tell myself that I'm like, I feel great, everything's fine. And then
I think the easiest way to think about it is like tennis elbow and golfer's elbow are repetitive stress injuries. So if people have elbow pain, that is like by definition, a repetitive stress injury. And one of the problems that I see climbers doing in general, and definitely route setters, is they just add more exercises that are very similar to route setting onto their routine because they're very specific for loading tissues. But that's just another source of repetitive stress that they have to recover from. But if you look at strength training practices, strength training is very different. Very controlled, very heavy, very progressive, very easy to recover from, contrary to what most people think. And that kind of thing is like absolutely what they need more than anything else. But doing a lot of like random new things is typically what people will do, and that tends to not produce very good results.
So we've got another question in the chat, and I'm going to wildly mispronounce that word. It's could a grip dynamometer be utilized to track fatigue during forerunning?
Yeah, that's the dynamometer. So it's like a Tyndek, a force board, something that measures force output. So the grip dynamometer is not the same thing as a Tyndek because that's more of like a strain gauge, where the dynamometer is a hand gripper. And in the context of like healthcare in general, it's well accepted that having a grip dynamometer peak force that changes with time absolutely is a measure of fatigue. So it's a very fast and easy way to understand systemic fatigue. So yes, the answer is that would be great. The question is like, what do you do? So you come in and you squeeze the dynamometer and your force is low. If you have the ability to allocate tasks to individuals with low force, sure, that makes sense. But if you can't, then it's kind of like one of those, well, I'm tired today, this is going to be a rough day. So that might be like an emotional hit more than like a actionable piece of information.
I think, Fox, it might be worth sharing your Alta story because it's sort of like directly tying to this. And then I have a thing that I would love to add to it.
Yeah, okay. I just don't want it to get too sad because it gets so sad real quickly, and we're not going to do that. So we ran a short long-term experiment at Alta where we were trying to track exactly that fatigue. And so basically once a week, the entire full-time route setting team would test 3 times a day. We did jump squats with a velocimeter attached to us, power pull-ups, again with a velocimeter, and then overhead force production on a 20 mil with a Tyndek. And we tested at the start of the day after a very quick warm-up, and then right before forerunning, and then right after forerunning. And the idea was 1, tracking fatigue throughout the day, and 2, tracking fatigue over time. And y'all, we bailed because exactly what you said, Tyler, like, what do you do with that information? If you come in and you are just trashed, do you not work? Like, that's not really an option for most people. Like, 1, the gym is going to need route setting done. And 2, route setters need to earn a paycheck. And so figuring out like if somebody's like legit injured, like what tasks can give them. But if just the team is really tired, there's not that much you can do with the information. And most of the teams saw a decline over time. Everybody was just getting cumulatively more and more tired. Now, some of this is like the overall schedule where everybody was setting 4 days a week and there was just like back-to-back comps. So there's very little time for recovery. So I don't want to say that that's exactly what every route setter like is going to experience, but that is what the Alta team experienced. It was just like this slow decline, and we ended up bailing on the experiment because it just made us sad.
So I think I've not done that testing, and I don't know if I would for that morale thing. I think the benefit of doing it is if you can actually create actionable items that you can like help to work past it. In Fox's scenario, it didn't seem like there was sort of like that outlet. But I want to share, I've worked in a couple of different gym organizations across the country and have had to put in place various things. And I think that some of the things that I've seen successful, Tyler, you spoke to like, okay, well, what do you do with this route setter who might feel tired? I think having some built-in solutions that are like, maybe less glorious, like organizing the shop, or maybe it's like you give them the drill and they don't actually climb, but they're making all the changes and they're moving all the ladders. And that is like a lower effort than having to do the like actual physical forerunning. Um, I think something else that I feel fortunate that my team has is that we have some dedicated dedicated forerunning positions. So, right, so like the team itself isn't as fully taxed because we have just this like fresh human who only maybe works 1 day a week as a side hustle to get a free membership. And maybe they come in and they're not actually super strong, but they help us with the empathy check and they can climb some amount of that low volume. Or maybe they're like the horsepower. They come in and they can crush V12 on command, and we can just like look back, and as the experienced route setter, we watch their body and we know what tweaks to make. Or maybe they're very good at communicating, and it just takes some of that load off. So I think there's like a lot of options that you can kind of employ if you've got a team that's kind of like a little haggard at the moment. There's obviously payroll costs associated with adding another human, but like we've found really good successes in it, and it's helped with some of those L&I requests for workers' compensation claims, whatever they call them.
Yeah, I mean, like there is that payroll component, but I do think that if you can, supplement an experienced team with some like energetic young blood, it can actually cut back on some of those long-term costs. Like if you have somebody who ends up needing to like retire because they are too tired and injured, you have to hire somebody new, train somebody new, like in some way, like backfill that position, which like every hiring study that exists shows that it just costs a lot of money to backfill positions. And if you're having to deal with like L&I and workman's comp situations because people are injured, like that's expensive too. So like if your gym is able to use those forerunners, like yeah, it's an added payroll cost, but might be a long-term money saver.
Yeah. Is there a sponsor, nutritional sponsor for USA Climbing?
Not that I know of.
I don't know. I put it in the chat box just so I didn't forget about it, but like shout out Gnarly or Vantage or something, like that would be a really useful thing, is just to like provide some sort of supplementation to route setters around gyms that are affiliated with USA Climbing, because like that stuff is expensive, right? Like, a scoop of protein is like $2 or $3. Like it's not cheap for any means, but like that's the kind of nutritional support that, and maybe creatine, that those setters need to maintain that type of muscular work for the duration of their working week, right? And like the simplest things typically are the best solutions, but they get overlooked because of a cost or not understanding or just like access. Like that would be a good kind of segue for some company to take charge.
Yeah, and they might have a sponsor. I'm not totally sure. I do know that for a while, at least when they were getting started, Gnarly did a great job of bringing route setters on as athletes, and there were different tiers. Like I had a bunch of friends who were Gnarly athletes, and they had to, post something once a month or so, and they got pretty significant discounts, if not free stuff. So that's something like, I don't know. I would say always consider to everybody, where if there's a company that you like, it doesn't hurt to reach out and see if they're looking for ambassadors or something. We can go through the organizations that we work for. We can go through USA Climbing, but also we're individuals that can like potentially seek things out for ourselves. And depending on the company, there are a lot of options.
Yeah. Do you all know many route setters that are like actively using creatine as a regular supplement, for obviously for work, but for climbing as well?
I know a few. Yeah. I grabbed some, but I haven't started regularly using it yet because I'm forgetful.
Yeah, that's one of those things that for sure adds capacity to high intensity, moderate intensity work. That's like an easy gain without a lot of extra work, other than you got to remember to take it.
That's the hard part sometimes.
It is kind of hard though. It's annoying like that for sure. It really is.
I just looked really quick, and I know a lot of people who are working in the industry have access to pro deals, and various capacities depending on where they're working and what partnerships are brought. But like, I just was thinking like, oh, USA Climbing is has all of these sponsors. Gnarly is one of them. And I looked at, one of the pro deal portals that I have access to, and I signed up through one of the USAC teams, and you can get access to like, I mean, this is citing 35% off of Gnarly. So like that is maybe something that some route setters could just like look into if they're looking in the right place.
Because it's really not like sustainable to like for most route setters to get enough protein in during the day. If you're a vegetarian, even if you eat meat, like you just don't want to eat that much meat. Like it's just really easy to put in protein, like just a scoop of protein in water and mix it up. Like setters their minds will be blown how much better they feel just by getting that protein intake. But it's really hard to do that without a supplement because it's just like inconvenient and they're just not going to make the time for it.
It's so much chicken otherwise.
It's gross, the amount of food you have to eat. It really is.
All right, so I've got another question. Any recommendations for adding heavier loads to wrists when already at a huge volume, i.e. the time behind a drill, carrying holds, waiting tables? Yeah,
there's nothing that person can do other than find a way to strength train their wrist. So like, and strength training the wrist is definitely not using slopers and training open-handed grips. Those are more passive on the wrist and less stabilizing from a muscular standpoint. But I'm a big fan, and we talked about this at the CWA, training the whole hand by using some sort of circular object for lifting that really allows force to be distributed over the fingers. So it's not so much like on the fingertips, it's like the whole hand, like squeezing something really hard and lifting. And then using something like the wrist wrench where you can actually create torque on the wrist to get either the flexor or the extensor side, but your wrist can be pretty straight. So it doesn't have to, because if you take that athlete and they want to do a bunch of wrist curls and reverse wrist curls, doing this under load creates a lot of shearing stress in the wrist joint. And you don't need extra wrist shearing stress in the joints to make them stronger. You just need to get the load. So a wrist wrench is an amazing tool. And then something circular that you can lift off the ground also works great.
it's like tossing an anecdotal story in. I used to have like a lot of wrist issues. Before rock climbing, I was a professional violist, and we get all kinds of wrist issues, and I have very loose joints. And so like I had a lot of wrist pain, and I found for myself, I sleep like this. And so I also just like would toss braces on just at night because like I didn't want to like weaken my wrist during the day. But I found that like because I was doing this at night, I was just putting even more like weird angle into my wrists. So I was like, just if anybody has wrist pain, it helped me a lot. I'm not a doctor, so but that curling wrists at night thing was the worst.
I'm kind of curious, maybe, one of the things that I feel like, I don't know if we've talked through yet, but, we're talking about why gyms should care, and what support we could either build into our days, whether it be dedicated warm-up time or, working with professionals that have a better understanding than the route setter might on working out, things like that. I'm curious, do any of you who might be working at a gym right now, like have any arrangements, whether it be like a trade for a membership or like staff who have, chiro, massage, PT training that you can kind of tap into? Does anyone have or is working on a route setting program that just like has that as a benefit? I'd love to hear who we got in the room that has something so we could all learn.
Let me add something while you're waiting for Nolan's question about the wrist. Like heavy deadlifting is also a really robust wrist load, even though doesn't look like a wrist training exercise. Lifting a heavy bar off the ground requires a lot of force, and really that force is the thing that creates stiffness in connective tissues, specifically the tendons and the ligaments a lot along the wrist. And so if we can use loads that are really heavy, that will stiffen connective tissue, that will protect the joint better. And so I think a lot of times people don't appreciate that weighted pull-ups, deadlifting, those things are wrist strengthening exercises. But if we do those, but then we feel like we're doing extra PT stuff on top of that, we're just adding more stress, but you're less likely to get something out of the, isolated exercise band things for the wrist than you are heavy weightlifting stuff.
Cool. All right. So Kurt says that my gym setters get free PT if they have any tweaks or injuries, and semi-private strength training. Very cool. TK, reading yours. Yeah, so developing a similar program. Yeah, getting some strength training for the setters. Very cool. Yeah. I know one of the things that I've set up for a couple of the gyms that I've been at is trade for membership, particularly if we're working with providers who aren't already members. It can be a very easy sell for a gym. So if you've got massage therapists who aren't a member of the gym, they're probably not going to become a member of the gym. But if you can offer them a free monthly membership in exchange for one massage a month, you get a few different massage therapists coming in, all of a sudden you can provide massages for your route setting team at effectively no cost to the gym, because again, they're not already members, so you're not losing membership money, and it can be a really nice perk for that route setting team. We've done similar things with chiropractors and physical therapists as well.
Yeah, a lot of times I know that the gyms that I've worked at often have personal trainers or people who have those credentials that we may be able to tap into. Either maybe it's not as like involved as like a one-on-one client session, but it's like, hey, they could spend a day like working with the route setting team to develop or help them build a forerunning routine for their warm-ups, or maybe it is a case-by-case basis where if there's an injury, you can just like head over to this person and get some help. But there's lots of options there depending on like who and what resources you have available in your areas. One thing I'd love to circle back to, Tyler, I know that we sort of talked about how important and how easy or simple, just building a strength routine into your warm up could be. Finding that time might be the hard part, but I wonder, I feel like you did a really good job when Fox and I sat in on your presentation at the summit. You kind of gave sort of this weekly protocol and then talked through some periodization. I wonder if this group would value hearing something like that from you today.
Yeah, I don't think it's even finding the time, because when I'm at gyms during lunchtime, setters definitely have time to do stuff, but they just do random things, right? And it's like they'll do stretching and they'll do some exercise band stuff. And like all of that is, in my mind, those are repetitive stresses that are low intensity, that are mostly some coordination demands. But those are really good chances for those athletes to know how strong and robust their body is. You could just because they're already kind of warmed up, lunch break, you could just go start doing a deadlift set. And if your gym has enough equipment, you could do a deadlift set, superset it with a bench press set, rest a couple minutes, do that 3 times. You could do a weighted pull-up set in conjunction with like a lateral raise or overhead press. Honestly, that's like all they need to do. And if they did that, like in the periodization scheme, essentially is maybe the first 4 to 5 weeks of that, everyone kind of does those things, and they maybe do 3 sets of 10 reps if they're not familiar with lifting. And then a version of periodization, they would maybe take a week off when they kind of plateau, and then they do it again, but they do 5 sets and they do 10, 8, 6, 4, 2, and they really increase the intensity. And so periodization for a setter with strength training, they don't need to go through like a power phase and a capacity phase. Really, they just need to know that the intensity is the thing that's the stimulus that they want and they need. And they just need to change it every 4 to 5 weeks, just so it's not so repetitive, because eventually the weights will plateau, and then they just need to modify it. Does that make sense? Like I would keep it really simple, and it should be really simple. And maybe in Nolan's question, you would add in another thing for your wrist. Like all of my strength training that I prescribe for myself and my clients is supersetted. Like I mentioned, deadlift, bench press, something for the hands and something for the wrist, like something circular, a wrist wrench. And then the next superset, they would do a pull-up, something for the shoulders, something for the fingers, and they would go through and do those, and you could complete them in 45 minutes, and that's essentially all they need. in my opinion.
And something that I didn't know for a lot of years, where I was doing the same strength training for literally years because it was what I had learned. I'm like, these are the exercises that I do, is just the slight adjustments. Switching, the different types of bench press, or just like switching things up just a little bit, was huge for me. And I share that, like, maybe everybody else knows, but I didn't. I'm like, this is my warm up, this is my strength training, this is what I do. And you do it for a little bit and you're like, I'm getting so strong, and then just nothing changes after that. So like, learning that I had to make those little like adaptations to like keep progressing was mind-blowing for me.
Yeah, I think one of the maybe most underappreciated adaptations that we get with training exercises is that you have to get coordinated with it before you can actually get stronger. So once someone gets coordinated at doing a bench press and a deadlift, and weighted pull-ups, climbers are pretty good at anyways, but once you get coordinated with those movements, then you get strong from it. When you plateau, you just need to modify how you use the exercise, but it's not really that efficient to learn a completely different movement because now you have to get coordinated with that movement. So a lot of people will do a deadlift on one day, a squat on another day, and those are fairly similar. They're not identical, but similar muscle groups, more or less. And then a bench press and an overhead press, and a vertical pull-up, a horizontal row. So like you can also separate those so you kind of cover the gamut of movement patterns that athletes will need. And people are amazed at how much better they feel just by doing it.
All right, so I've got another question. Considerations with setting volume, strength training, and seasonality. For example, during comp season, or if a setter is trying to ramp up outdoor climbing intensity. Yeah, so how do we time everything for those seasonal goals if we're doing prep setting all the time also?
That's the hardest thing. That's hopefully where maybe the setters and the team has a discourse with the gym and being like, hey, the fall is coming up. We have XYZ competitions coming up, but it's the climbing season for us. Maybe they go, and I don't know anything about the dynamic there, but maybe they go on a less intense setting schedule. Maybe their frequency of setting gets to go down. Maybe that's their modified paid time off, so they actually recover better, so they get the chance to have harder sessions for themselves and save energy to go outside, right? And that's out of my expertise, but there has to be some level of reduction in setting volume or in forerunning volume so they can recover. But there's not really extra things they need to do that's going to prepare them for that. It really is a recovery problem more than anything.
Yeah, I had the benefit of, like, I have a close friend who's also a coach, and I would give him my entire like 3 to 6 month schedule to get help programming strength training like around when my big competitions were. And we timed things as best we could, knowing that the recovery was fairly limited, to try to be as strong as possible for those big competitions. But it was definitely a challenge. I mean, I really value having expert opinions weigh in, because I am aware of how much I know and don't know. And that's definitely a privilege that, I've got friends who can do that. But if you have resources, I would definitely lean on them.
Maybe let me add one thing. So maybe another, like we talked about, like a strength training superset with weights and doing repetitions, let's say 10 reps per set, or dropping the reps. But in a season, if athletes want to strength train and they want to do it as low fatigue as possible, that's where having an understanding of exercise science plays in, where you could do an overcoming style isometric mid-thigh pull with the deadlift, isometric overcoming with a bench press, one arm overcoming isometric for pulling movements. And those are ways to keep the recruitment very high. But the science would say those are the least fatiguing types of muscle contractions. And so those are really easy ways for athletes to stay strong and use less energy with strength training. But you wouldn't do that forever, because you want the full range of motion strength training loads. So it's like, that's like an in-season 6-week block where they do the same kinds of things, but they're not identical, and they're definitely not as fatiguing.
All right, we've got a question. Do you think fitness tracking devices like Whoop could be useful for setters, or are they too heart rate focused versus muscle strain focused?
The only muscle strain, the only muscle strain devices are NIRS devices, which are muscle oxygen sensors and like EMG things. But the NIRS devices are the most appropriate, but they're expensive and they're kind of hard to understand the data for people unless you have like a really good knowledge about them. I would say Whoop is fine. Like heart rate variability is fine. I think even though it's not a direct muscle stress measure, systemic fatigue is as problematic for repetitive stress injuries as the muscular stress. So yeah, I think that's way better than nothing. Just it'll hold people accountable a little bit more than not tracking anything.
I do get really grumpy though that I haven't found any fitness tracker that recognizes going up a ladder. It's just like, oh, you're standing.
Accelerometer probably would.
I don't. It seems to think that things are like it's like walk. It doesn't measure it as stairs.
Oh.
Yeah, because like so many things rely on like how your arms move, and because you move differently on where on your ankle. Does that work?
I like that. Yep, I like that.
Sick. Okay, yeah, because yeah, the arms don't move the same way on a ladder, and so I'm like climbing hundreds of ladders a day, being like, doesn't count it.
Yeah, an accelerometer on your ankle could work. That would work.
Nice.
And do you have to tell it that it's on the ankle so that it will like update accordingly if it thinks it's on the wrist? Because I know that they have like predictive, it's like tracking certain things.
Sorry, Tara, I'm just reading your comment. Your Garmin thinks you're swimming when you're stripping.
Yeah.
Goodness.
It's probably not that different, really. I mean, a little bit less frequency, but
I immediately read that comment and thought that it was because it got wet.
Yeah.
Damn, your gym is hot. That is already
Yup. Oh goodness. So funny. All right. Well, it's about 10 to the hour. And I just want to check in. Like, you guys are being really good about putting things into comments. I want to make sure that we're touching on, like, all of the different pieces y'all came here looking to have answered as best as possible. So is there anything that we're missing? Are there like, I don't know, Tyler, do you have anything that you were hoping to like share with the crowd that you haven't had a chance to yet?
No, I mean, I do a lot of talking on podcasts and whatnot. We could ramble for hours, but I want to answer what people are mostly interested in.
We'll give a second. I'm like slowly getting used to like the delay of asking a question in a Zoom room and then being like, oh, I have to wait a moment now. Oh yeah, so insights on protein/creatine. Do you have any thoughts on overall energy intake and the relationship between injury risk? Has anyone had issues with setters trying to maintain artificially low body weight or energy intakes?
I mean, I think that's a problem just in general with the climbing community. It's really hard not to have that be a habit and a problem. So absolutely setters kind of fall into that category. I think the creatine as being like a risk for gaining a lot of extra weight is very individual. Most climbers, just generally speaking, are not going to gain a ton of weight from it, where some people just are going to be easy gainers. Like I will gain 5 pounds really easily after a loading dose of creatine. And so it kind of is very individual there, but there's definitely a problem with, people being concerned about body weight and having an injury risk. And that's well documented in the literature at this point. And setters that are also concerned about that just kind of are at a greater risk because they're more physically tired. But I don't know, professional climbers climb a lot. So maybe the pro climbers and the route setters are kind of on par with physical fatigue. And the science would say for sure pro climbers that are at risk of low body weight are definitely a risk factor for getting injured.
Yeah, we've got an individual question looking, it's got a partial A4 pulley tear. General timeline to return to normal climbing.
That's funny. Well, hey, Kurt, that's a great question. Do we want to answer that question, or is this a setting only clinic? I guess that's the most common climbing injury.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure like if Kurt is the only person in this room who has ever experienced that injury, I'd be surprised. And if he's the only person that ever watches this to experience, like, no, there's lots of people that would have that same question.
So it's hard to say. Pulley tear can mean a lot of things. If he has a diagnosed pulley rupture, the reported timelines are 3 months to get back to like hard climbing without pain, concern. But saying you have a pulley tear without a proper diagnosis is kind of hard because tendinosynovitis can look like a pulley injury. Ganglion cysts can look like pulley injuries that are sore to the average person, maybe that not a healthcare provider, of course, but So it's kind of hard. Partial injuries, partial sprains to the pulleys tend to be trickier to manage and take longer in some cases because people can climb on them and they get sore afterwards, but they still want to perform. Where pulley ruptures are a very distinct moment. People tend to follow rules and tend to be scared of those. Maybe not right, not always necessarily, but they will be. So depends. But I would say 3 months on average.
All right. How necessary do you think getting setters to do cardio is? And at what frequency protocol?
I would say cardio is a recovery thing. So I think cardio is still really helpful. I probably wouldn't do a lot of cardio on a setting day. I would, if you're going to do strength training as a supplement to setting, I think that works really good as a warm-up routine if you have the equipment and your gym has the access. That's great. And doing cardio on a non-climbing day, non-setting day makes sense because that's an active recovery strategy. But essentially, setters can think about their day kind of like a competition climber. They're trying to onside a boulder and then they're going to rest a couple minutes and then they got to do that again. And then they're going to rest and they're going to do that again. The ability to recover between problems is an aerobic thing. And so having aerobic fitness is a great idea. So like at least twice per week doing some zone 2 type of cardio, maybe airdyne bike, rowing machine, elliptical machine, whole body for like 40 minutes makes sense, is like a baseline level of cardio. And then if they want to do sprint interval training, that works too. But I would say a couple times per week makes sense.
This might be something that, again, everybody just knew except for me recently, but I started doing cardio at the end of really heavy lifting. It's game changing. Like, I was not sore the next day and I was like, oh, why haven't I been doing this for the last forever, man? I've always put it at the start of a workout rather than the end. And I was like, oh, nuts. So again, maybe everybody already knows it's really helpful.
Yeah, I think it's important for setters and it's probably underappreciated because it's not that fun. I mean, with the exception of like hiking and like, alpine style stuff, that counts as cardio, which I think works just as well and is way more interesting and fun. But like cardio in a gym sucks, but cardio in general is a great supplement.
Tyler, I've got a question about I've got some people on my team who are experiencing like some severe knuckle swelling or what is it called, synovitis. Have you worked with anyone that's had that, or do you have any like recommendations on how to minimize it? Or
I probably talk to 5 people a day with capsulitis. So it's like, it's the most common, well, arguably tenosynovitis is the most common overuse injury in the climber's finger, but capsulitis is right there next to it. And there's no doubt that and it kind of depends on the symptoms. The swelling of the joint could be a ligamentous injury, which comes from open-handed passive positions, lots of slopers, lots of kilter board, 3-finger dragging, where the true capsulitis is more within the joint, from pressure within the joint that comes from a lot of half and full crimping. So it's like, to say capsulitis for people that have a swollen knuckle is kind of confusing because it could be 2 different things which aren't managed the same. They're actually managed very differently. But if someone's having like pain, half crimping actively, then those people probably need to use and this is very general, use a little bit more open-handed positions with their training and climbing. But conversely, someone that has pain in the joint with open-handed positions are better off using more half crimp positions because it's going to be a little bit more stabilizing. So it's like kind of confusing where everyone that has a big joint that's swollen, they want to say I have synovitis. But those are 2 separate diagnoses that look similar to the climber, but are not treated the same. So it's got to be, it's a volume management thing, right? If you're doing a lot of kilter board climbing and you have a pissed off joint, you probably have some sort of ligamentous stress injury. But if you're doing a lot of like moonboarding and like full crimp training and route climbing and your joint is sore, that's probably more capsulitis, like proper inside the joint. I don't know if I answered your question, but it's hard to
no, it's great.
Hard to differentiate because it's like those aren't the same thing and they wouldn't be treated the same.
I think even that
that's the
too.
Yeah, I was going to say that's the hardest part, right? Because same symptoms, completely different results or directions as far to how to treat it is going to depend entirely on what's actually going on in there.
And I think if you ask the athletes, they'll tell you like, what do you like to do? And people that have like ligamentous injuries, which are like capsular tears, ligamentous strains. They like open-handed positions a lot. And so they'll tell you open-handed positions are sore. And so those people need to, get away from using as much powerful open-handed positions. Where the people that have proper capsulitis, they'll be like, that hurts in the morning, hurts when I flex my finger, hurts when I half crimp. Those people need to get the hell away from half crimping and aggressive bar grabbing and aggressive weightlifting stuff. And that's where drilling is hard, because setters have to squeeze a drill and they have to do a lot of stuff with their fingers. So having a setter manage those symptoms is quite challenging, because their job requires them to grasp things, at a high volume. Pun intended. But that's not really a grasping thing.
So Tara's got a great question. It feels like the heat is making finger joint inflammation worse. Is icing in the middle of the day or middle of forerunning a good idea?
Yeah, sure. I don't think there's any. I mean, the icing is going to be the cheapest, most effective analgesic, which is just like a pain reduction. But don't assume that icing and making it feel better is physiologically doing a whole lot in that particular moment. It's mostly just like a short-term pain relief, which is great. Those people can use other means of using like Coban tape, which is a wrapping, like a pre-wrap tool. If you get like 1 inch of Coban tape, they can wrap from the tip to the base of the finger to put pressure on the joint at night, which will reduce the swelling. So there's a lot of management type strategies that people can do that have those injuries. But ultimately, if it gets to the point where they're consistently sore, pain's not going away, chronically troubled, they have to see a healthcare provider and get it taken care of. But there are things that you can do. But icing between's totally fine. No downside.
All right. Well, we're right at the hour. I just want to check in, because we've had a lot of really good questions. I want to be aware of everybody's time. Any last burning thoughts you have to ask right now? You have half a second.
Hopefully it's about donuts.
Now I want a donut. Dang it. It's okay. I've got cheesecake. Nobody panic. I've got cheesecake.
Ooh, that sounds good.
All right. Cool.
I think we did it.
Yeah, we did the thing. Hey, well, thank you so much for your time, Tyler. Thank you, Scott, for the time and space. Thank you all for coming and asking really good questions.
Yeah, thanks for having me. That was fun.